to I Love This Thing So Fricking Much, a podcast about passion. My name is Sophie Katz, and today I am joined by Simon, a Pokemon master born to be the very best like no one ever was. Welcome to the show, Simon.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Good to have you here. So here's how this works. Simon will have 3 minutes to talk about something that he loves. This can be a person, place, thing, concept, activity, anything he wants. Our only requirement is that he loves it wholeheartedly and wants to tell us why. Are you ready, Simon?
Yes, I am.
All right. I've got my timer here. Now, what do you love so freaking much?
Well, if you couldn't tell by the introduction, that would obviously be Pokemon. I have been a Pokemon enthusiast for as long as I can remember, which fortunately for me, I like to say is probably from when I was born, because Pokemon began in 1996 in Japan and made its way to the United States in around 1998, if I'm correct, which means that right around that time, I would have been 2 years old, which would have been the perfect time for me to start getting into the lovable world of Pokemon with all of its wonderful creatures and lore. For people who don't necessarily know that much about Pokemon, it is quite an expansive world at this point. Pokemon began with just a simple game of Red and Blue. It came out on the Game Boy systems, and then it quickly evolved due to popularity and continued to produce more games, starting out with Yellow version, which was a sequel in a sense to the original games, and then went into Gold and Silver, which was referred to as its second generation because there were new Pokemon, and it continued to come out with more and more games. At the same time, it also started to begin having its own television series, its own anime. It started following the main characters of Ash, Misty, and Brock as they traveled through the Pokemon world in a way that paralleled the games. So as the games continued to advance, the anime continued to advance and continued to go through these generations. Now, playing the games and watching the TV, you would think that might be enough, but Pokemon decided to continue to branch further, continued to merchandise itself through things like toys and games, but more so through the use of trading cards. Around, I believe it was, again, 1998 or 1999, Pokemon started to release trading cards out in Japan and then quickly in the United States. And that is actually where I found my original passion for Pokemon. My brothers and I would collect the cards, and on weekends and in the afternoons, we would sit down together, show our cards, we would trade them, we would do pretend Pokemon battles with them. And because of those cards, we would watch some of the shows together. And because I was on the younger side, I never got to really play the original games as much as my brothers did, although I did eventually find my way back to them. But truthfully, Pokemon now has recently celebrated its 25th anniversary. I believe this year it's just celebrated its 27th. And so it's just continuing on and on and on. We just got our 9th generation of Pokemon, meaning there have been 9 different regions. We are at over 1,000 different Pokemon now. The trading cards continue to evolve. There's all sorts of different forms of them. And honestly, I could just go on and on.
Go ahead and finish your thought.
Because there is just too much to talk about when it comes to Pokemon.
That's awesome. Thank you for telling us about Pokemon today.
Of course.
You mentioned that you got into Pokemon first through the cards and then moved on into the shows and games. Do any particular iterations of Pokemon stand out to you as your favorites?
I love Pikachu. Pikachu is definitely by far my favorite. I've been collecting specifically Pikachu cards from the beginning. I remember anytime my brothers and I had them, I would be like, I don't have that one yet. What can I get? How can I get it from you? I remember having the stuffed animals. I mean, Pikachu was Ash's classic partner Pokemon, so naturally I got to see him all the time in the anime. And so definitely by far my favorite cards that has the most meaning to me is a Pikachu card. So hands down, Pikachu.
I can only assume then that when you play the game, you try to have Pikachu on your team.
Yes, up until around the time I was in high school, anytime I played the game, I would make sure I caught a Pikachu and it would be on my team. So I'd have these level 70 Pokemon that were final evolution, these really strong ones, and then there'd be a little Pikachu on my team too.
Talk a little more about the lore of Pokemon.
I mean, it really depends because, as I said, there's 9 different regions now.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're talking about regions, those are just the different, you might call them countries, the Pokemon. And each one is based on a different country in our world. So the original 3, or I believe maybe even 4 generations of Pokemon are different regions of Japan. So the Pokemon from there and their stories and a lot of their lore is actually tied into a lot of Japanese lore.
Mm-hmm.
And then as Pokemon started to do other parts of the world, there's a lot of lore tied into places like New York City, France, Hawaii. We just did Britain and Spain. So there's actually a lot of crossover between some of like the myths of Pokemon and those different countries' mythologies as well. The classic one is Ninetales. It's just a general Pokemon in the first generation. It's a fox-like Pokemon with 9 tails, hence the name. And I can't remember its exact Japanese counterpart, but there is a mythological creature. It looks exactly like it. It's known for having like the 9 tails. It's meant to lure people away. 9 tails lures people away sometimes. Another one, for example, in this newest one that came out that's based on Spain, there's 2 Pokemon that are meant to represent knights because of how in Spain they're known for like the Crusades.
Mm-hmm.
So they had Pokemon that are meant to be 2 different forms of knights, and their Pokédex entry, the story about them is how they're chivalrous and how they like to go out on these adventures and prove themselves and earn honor.
You mentioned that you got into Pokemon with your brothers, that this was a family activity. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, so we collected the cards. It was mainly my eldest brother and I. My middle brother, he was into it for a little bit, but quickly fell out. But he and I would collect the cards. And then with the cards, it's a game. So you can build decks, and just like Magic the Gathering or any other, trading card game, you can follow the rules to play with them. So we would collect the cards, we'd build our decks, and then we'd have, just play battles together to see who was building the better decks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, because I was younger, he often made the decks for me, and he let me, we would decide who's using which deck, and he would often beat me. I wasn't, offended or anything like that, but it was a lot of fun. And his biggest thing was he liked to collect some of the original cards that were called first editions. And he went out of his way. He collected all of the first edition cards for the first 2 or 3 series that came out. And nowadays that binder is probably worth thousands of dollars because of how rare some of those cards are nowadays. So we would collect and we would sometimes trade. A lot of times it was him giving me cards. And then eventually, as I started playing the games more, we were able to do the trading in the games as well, or battling in the games. But as I started getting really about the age where I could actually understand games and play them on my own, that's when he started slowly falling out of it. So then it was just me carrying on.
You mentioned that the cards that you collected back then must be worth a lot of money now, but certainly they also, I can only imagine, have a lot of emotional value to you as well.
Oh, yeah. It was funny because at one point he had the binder just kind of in like a storage bin that he was keeping at my parents' house. And I said to him, I was like, you don't really collect or play anymore. I do still collect. What could I do to get this binder from you? It holds a lot of value to me. I'd love to have it in my collection. But he was like, no, it's way too valuable now. So I don't think I'll ever get it off of him.
Is there anything that you don't like about Pokemon? And if so, how do you handle that?
So some of the stuff I would say is that it's definitely an age perspective, is that, as I'm now a little bit older, more mature, some of the games, some of the TV shows, they're a little bit more geared towards the younger audience. They might, in the shows, they might be trying to teach the lessons, or, it might be a little more silly. They might be simplifying how the game mechanics work to make it easier for younger kids to play.
Mm-hmm.
And in all honesty, even when those things bother me, most of the time I'm just like, I just step back. I take it with that little bit of grain of salt. Their target audience is lots of people, and not everything's going to be a true hit for me, but I'm still going to, enjoy it. So when I watch the TV shows, I am not always 100% focused on it, but I like to listen to it. I like to follow the story. I like to see where it's going, because I know at some point there's going to be something that I'm like, oh, that was cool. And every once in a while, there still are those things. So even when I'm like, why are you doing this now? I know that it's going to continue to be something I enjoy.
And you're watching it for your past self in addition to your present self.
Exactly. And, they continue to do things that get me like all giddy. When they released Pokemon Go on the phones, I remember I was in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, working at a summer camp. It got released at like 9 o'clock at night. And my friends and I were just like, wandering around the woods of our camp being like, are there any Pokemon here? Where can we find them?
Yes.
So there are definitely still those moments where I'm like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And those are moments I live for because I know that when I have those moments, it'll make up for the moments where I'm like, okay.
Simon, thank you so much for telling us about something you love today.
Of course, it was my absolute pleasure because obviously I could go on and on talking about it forever.
That is the whole point of the show. And thank you, our listeners, for tuning in today. If you have something you love so freaking much you want to tell me all about it, consider this your invitation to join the show. I Love This Thing So Freaking Much is a production of Through the Window Media. This episode was directed and edited by Sophie A. Katz. You can find us at Through the Window on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or Tumblr. That is THROU the Window at all the social media sites. Be good to yourself, be kind to each other, and you'll hear from us again soon.